want you to operate at the level of understanding and designing systems. And so I want you to use AI.
Welcome to Children, protect me, stand up, where CTOs share the tales and the comments. From startups to big names, innovation time for how many CTOs will share their stories untold.
Welcome everybody to another episode of the How Many CTOs Does It Take podcast. I'm Brad Hefta-Gaub, and this is my co-host,
Scott Porad.
All right, Scott, welcome back. What do you want to talk about this week?
Brad, only our loyal listeners might remember. On a recent episode, I talked about how I had been in an interview. I'd been interviewing somebody who was wearing a baseball cap.
Yeah, I felt seen or being called out.
It really threw me for a loop. And this is not about workplace fashion any longer. This is actually about a more modern problem, which is interviewing in the age of AI-assisted coding.
Yeah.
And it actually takes on two dimensions. There's interviewing in person and there's interviewing remotely. And even a lot of in-person companies now are still interviewing remotely because it is much more efficient. So I'm curious to discuss with you best practices, so to speak, if there are best practices yet, for how to interview in an AI-assisted coding era. And I think it's two parts of it. One is interviewing for the AI skills, meaning do you know how to use the tools?
Yeah.
And the other part is, well, if somebody knows how to use the tools and get the AI to do it for them, do they actually know the fundamentals? Right. And so I'm just curious to know if how you're doing it these days, if you're doing it, or how you would hypothesize to do it if you're not doing it.
Well, I love this topic. This is a great topic. I think that, yeah, there's lots to kind of dig in here. And I don't know that we can cover everything in a single podcast episode, but I think it's worth starting the conversation. Let me start by saying that I always thought that like LeetCode style interview questions were not a very constructive and useful interview technique. And I think that one of the things about like the age of AI is that like that just like a remote, remote call interviews where you ask LeetCode questions are just going to be a waste of time because every person would be able to just have their HUD overlay of heads up display overlay of the AI chatbot helping answer your LeetCode questions. In fact, there's like a company that's like an Andreessen Horowitz funded startup of some engineering students from Columbia or something like that that got kicked out of Columbia because they built a thing. I think it's called Cluzy or something like that. It's AI assisted LeetCode programming thing.
And I know that we have a few non-technical listeners to this podcast. So what is LeetCode?
Yeah, LeetCode is basically like you stump the interviewer stumps the interviewee by asking to perform, coding gymnastics, like
Mm.
a simple classic example is please implement in the language of your choice, or maybe I give you specifically the language of Python, or the language of JavaScript, reverse a string in
Mhm.
fastest possible time or something like
So
that.
just some coding trick.
Coding tricks. There's like leetcode.com or something like that has, hundreds of LeetCode tests, and like score your test is like performance and memory usage, etc.
Mhm.
Right.
So what do you think is a good interview?
Well, I mean, my preferred interview technique is to get somebody to talk in depth technically about a project that they specifically worked on, right?
Mhm.
I've been writing code for more than 40 years, so it's like you'd better be able to explain any project you ever worked on to me in a way that you can make it clear to me what you actually did, what the architecture actually was, what the challenging problems of it were, what your technical choices were, and we ought to be able to have a conversation there that gives me a lot of information about what you actually know how to do as an engineer. That's how I typically interview people.
In an AI coding world, that would get around one of the topics, which is, do people really know what they're talking about? If they had the AI robot write all the code, if they could then just describe what was happening there to you, then that would illustrate that.
Yeah, exactly. I'm a huge believer in like, show me your GitHub account. right?
Yeah.
And even if you only worked on private projects, right? Like
Mhm.
your GitHub view still shows your activities across private projects and public projects, you know? And so, okay, wow, this person has 78% commits, of, this big, huge green bar of work they've been doing on all these private projects. Now I know you're doing a bunch. Okay, cool. Tell me about. I don't want you to disclose anything that's confidential, but let's talk
Mhm.
about it. Pick a project that you want to talk to me about, and tell me about it. And yeah, to your point, like you have to be able to understand the technology to be able to handle that interview question, um, and it can go a lot of different directions. I find that it should help people kind of like get away from their nervousness. Like, I mean, some people are going to be naturally nervous, but like, I don't care if I'm not going to ding you because you're doing some leet code programming thing and you put a semicolon in the wrong place. Like, compilers tell us that. I don't need you to be a compiler. Compilers do that. I want you to operate at the level of understanding and designing systems. And so I want you to use AI.
Yeah. Now, what's your opinion? And I think in an AI assisted world, my opinion on this is changing. What is your opinion on the sample coding project?
I mean, I think there's value in that still. I think that there certainly was a time, like you and I were at health tech company together, and that was a big thing that they had. They kind of sent off people with go do this sample coding project, and there's pros and cons to that. Like in a buyer's market, then where you're or a hirer's market, an employer market, where employees are looking for work, they're more willing to sort of like jump through hoops to prove that they're worth hiring. In an employee sided market where there's a lot of demand for employees, I think that kind of like do a coding project, or I think you lose good candidates because they're just like, I'm I don't have time to write that code for you. So to me, I feel like it's like it can give you good information, but it can cut both ways. Like sometimes it kind of gets in your way.
Yeah, I was for a long, long time a big fan of the coding project, because I felt, and I would say this even to the recruiters, because the recruiters would always say, "Oh, this is really slowing stuff down. We're losing candidates." And I would sort of say, "Look, you could take away all the interviews and just if I had the choice between no interviews and only coding project, or interviews only and no coding project, I'd take the coding
Yep.
project because I want to just see what somebody can do. Like I don't want to hear what they can do. I want to see what they can
Yep.
do." And I found that it was not the case that somebody who did a good coding project always got hired, but it was almost always the case that when there wasn't a great coding project and then we interviewed someone, we ended up not wanting to hire them.
Right.
It was a really good signal. But it was a burden for people, and I think that became an impediment. But I do think that where my mind is changing is now in an AI coding world. I mean, we would basically would send someone a spec and say code this up, and now you could just give it to Cursor and say, well, this company wants this thing. Can you make this for them?
Well, but okay, so 100% agree with you on that. I have a couple reactions to that. The first one is, well, isn't that how I'd want them to code it if they worked for me? Because I'd want them to go as fast as like if you're wasting your time pressing the enter key and the tab key and the bracket key, like you're slowing yourself down. I want you to move faster than that anyway. So, you absolutely use the AI agent to solve this problem. But then I need you to come back and you need to code review it. You need to prove that it's working. You need to have implemented your unit test. You need to have written your ER description, and you need to come to me and tell me that and defend your code in front of me, right? Like tell me what was hard about that? Why was that a challenging question? Why was that challenging? How did you solve that? What did you
So I have two questions, two comments leading into a question or something like that. One is something you also said on a previous podcast, and I agree with it, which is increasingly what's required when working with the AI coding assistants is like tech lead and engineering manager type skills, which is true. And I've always felt in interviewing, even interviewing for, entry level and mid level IC engineers, evaluating their sort of those types of skills is really important. So I guess my question is, if you were designing an interview loop, you're at a new company, you're going to hire some people, you're going to design an interview loop in this AI assisted coding world. How would you do it these days? What would you? How would you introduce this piece to it?
Well, I already told you that I would I tend to lean away from like code questions anyway, and I
Yeah.
want to lean towards higher level thinking anyway,
Hmm.
right? Which I think lends itself to what I'm saying is the better model to use AI agents anyway, right? Is
So is
to,
that like, tell me, is it basically tell me, is it a star question? Tell me about a time where you developed something with an agent. What was the problem? It was, star, situation, task, action, result.
yeah,
Is that basically, is it that those kind of questions
sure.
with
That
an
sounds
AI
like
agent?
I think you could totally make a bunch of star questions around how do you use AI agents? How have you used them to solve business, solve the specific problems? And you could certainly use star-like questions around all kinds of things like building new software, refactoring old software, finding a particularly challenging bug, right?
Mm.
Um, I do think that we had one of our early episodes last season was with Ted Neward where we talked about interviewing in general. I thought there were some really great nuggets that came out of that conversation. And one of the points that I think Ted made that I 100% agree with is that you really have to have a very clear expectations for the role, and
Mm-hmm.
your interviewers need to evaluate the person's fitness for those expectations of the role, right? And so I think more and more the role of being a software engineer in the AI assisted coding world is all about, are you good at evaluating code written by another developer, aka the agent? Are you good at evaluating the code? So one thing that might be useful would be like, I could imagine this being an interview loop thing, design an interview loop that includes like, we have a bunch of pull requests, a bunch of code written, do a code review.
Code review interview. I was thinking about just earlier this week was telling me about that I work with. We had some code written in Ruby, and we wanted a TypeScript version. I don't know. One person was belly aching about it, and the other person was like, "Well, let's just see if an agent can do it." And it was basically a hole in one. They had to rework the prompt a little bit. It took them about an hour. Which sidebar? I think that's one of the key things that people miss with this AI stuff is sometimes it takes a while to get the prompt right. You know,
Yeah.
you have to iterate, but after a while, they got it. And so I wonder if that's an interesting thing to just almost, hey, here is, I don't know, something written in one language. Maybe we can sit down and pair together, and you can just tell your AI of choice like to make it in this other language, and then we can look through it together, and you can tell me if you think it's right.
That has been a technique that I've used to varying degrees of success in interviews in the past, and I would like to get this to work well consistently, and that is a pair programming interview. VS Code does support this like shared remote mode where you can basically like turn on, like basically open up VS Code in a way that you using your VS Code can connect to my VS Code, and I literally can watch you type and follow your cursor around, and you're looking at the code base, which is my little sample code base, and you're changing it directly, right? Think Cursor has this mode yet? Hey, Cursor team, like let's turn this on, like pair programming agents where we both are able to look at the same agent and type into it and chat with the agent together. And I would love to basically see how you use the agent. So here's some code, it's got a bug in it, or here's some old code in one language. Tell me how you use the agent to implement this feature, right?
I got a lot of questions in there. First, a comment. Company I was at, this is like a long time ago now, we did this cool thing, a pair programming interview. This is how it worked. I'm the interviewer, you are the interviewee, and we're working on the same code. And it starts like, okay, I'm going to write a test. And it was a basic thing, like we're going to make a calculator or something. One of these, we're going to make the elevator algorithm or the calculator. I don't know what it was, something basic like that, right? I'm going to write a test. Now you make it pass. Okay, cool. We did that one. Sweet. Now you write this test. That person does it. Okay, now I'm going to make that pass. Right? Back and forth, ping pong. And we sort of had a script to like escalate
Yeah.
it and make it go on for wherever this thing was we were building. But it was a cool way of just working with somebody, seeing we got to see like how do they write tests, how do they write code, what is it like to work with them. He was just sitting next to him, sitting on the same computer, sharing it. That was a fun way to interview. Okay, so here's the question about this agent thing. I'm giving you some code. I want you to make the agent make it do something different. Would you give him some good clean code, or would you give him some really stinky code?
Like, I've done this most recently, literally with the code base of the enterprise that we're interviewing for. So like
Okay.
here's like a real project that needs to happen. Did exactly that project. And it didn't like there were mechanical problems, logistical problems with it that I think kind of got in the way of it. So that's why I'm sort of saying like I feel like it's a very straightforward problem to say, literally, here's a ticket. Here's a ticket and here's
Mhm.
the code. Tell me how you solve this problem, right?
Yeah.
Because that's what's going to happen on day one anyway. And if the
Right.
code base is big enough, I mean, I just fixed some bug today in some code base where it's like, fuck, I haven't looked at that file. I didn't write that code. Some other Yahoo on the team wrote this code, right? Or like I get dropped in as a fractional CTO, like when we were talking to uh, Scott Bradley, he's like his firm like it's dropped into places and it's like their whole job is unfucking code bases, right? And it's like
Mhm.
so you're dropped in on some random code and it's just like it's a mess. Well, guess what? That's the job. Like that's
Yeah.
the job. And I'm more certain that with AI coding, like we said, I think we said this in a couple episodes ago, where I'm like, I think 2026 is all going to be about this K-shaped economy for like the haves and the have-nots around understanding AI assisted coding. So for the people that are good at AI coding, there's going to be more and more work for them to do to go unscrew up code bases that were messed up by humans and AI, right? So expect that you're going to randomly be dropped in some code you've never seen before, and it's a real test to your ability as an engineer to be able to like quickly figure that out, right?
That create any intellectual property issues? You got interview candidates looking at your real code?
Maybe. Obviously, you have to solve that as appropriate. I mean, most the average the companies I tend to work with are startups that are moving so fast that that's not a problem. Just have them sign an NDA.
Or I was thinking the other way around, which is,
Oh,
have
I'm not
you?
going to actually use the code, right? Like, besides, or maybe I do. I don't know. Like, you mean like work for hire, intellectual property
Yeah.
work for hire?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. We're trying to evaluate their ability as yes. Yeah. Granted, solve that problem. Have the legal team come up with something, but there's no reason why you can't solve that problem. Maybe you don't actually have them. You don't commit the code, right? Like in the example that I am thinking of, I knew it was a very doable project because literally a developer had just done it, and that
Mhm.
developer told me, "Oh yeah, that took me like 20 minutes,"
Mhm.
right? So I know it's a do. So that's an example where it's like it's a real example of the code that they'd be in. It's a project that I know is a solvable problem, right? And so really we're just testing that we're directly testing the engineer's ability to do exactly the types of problems that we need to have them do. And it shows me how they solve problems, right? The tools that they reach for.
Then you're just looking for all the normal stuff you kind of look for, which is, are they breaking it down into small tasks?
Yeah.
Are they, the normal kind of things? Interesting.
So it's interesting. I literally just did this interview with a candidate for another firm, and it was like, to be fair, the person was relatively junior, and I asked talk to me about a project you've worked on, and this person had very very limited experience. And what was really interesting is effectively they said, "Man, I thought you were going to be grilling me on React Native." And so they were kind of like, this interview was a lot easier than I thought it would be, you know. And at the same time I was like, look, you're not really experienced enough for the role that we're trying to hire, so but keep up the good work and
Mhm.
talk to us in the future, um but I just think that these like coding quiz questions are a waste of everybody's time.
There was a trend, I'd say it was about 7, 8 years ago, of companies that, made online platforms for sort of coding quiz questions. You'd screen a resume, and if someone passed that, then you'd say, okay, go do these coding tests, and then it would give you a score
Yep.
kind of thing. And we tried that, and it was okay. I mean, it was, as you say, it was these leak questions, right? And you got to see if there was some proficiency, but I think that assumes that there's something on the other side, which is, for lack of a better way of describing it, that there are perfectly well described tickets that you want someone to do,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
And at least in the realities I've lived in, there are never perfectly well described tickets, despite our best efforts. In fact, I would actually say differently. There are never perfectly well described tickets because there hasn't been a lot of effort. In fact, I'm going to detour a little bit. I was talking with one of our engineering managers yesterday. Um, we don't use we most of the people I work with use a tool called Augment Code, which is a competitor to Cursor.
Yep.
We bought an enterprise license, and at the time we did is because they had a bigger context window. I think Cursor's probably pulled ahead, but that's beside the point. Anyway, this engineering manager, he's plugged our GitHub, our Confluence, our Jira, our company objectives, all sorts of stuff into this thing. He refers to it as a problem brief, but like, he was showing me yesterday, there's like this one new error showing up in the log, and it's like, what is this? And someone might file a ticket which just has the string of the error, like, hey, we started getting these on Tuesdays. And
Right.
some engineer would go, well, I guess I'm gonna go start digging into this. And he set an agent about it, and it wrote like, I don't know, like 2 or 3 pages of like information and context of like where this was coming from and might be what might be causing it, and
Yeah.
potential ways to fix it, and all
Yeah.
sorts of things like that. And so ultimately you get a much more robust ticket, which potentially you could hand to an engineer, say, now fix this, or now let the robot fix this. I'm not actually sure why he wasn't just coming up with answers to those things. When I say answers, I mean solutions, but it might be that there were some choices that had to be made. I don't know what. I've digressed a ton from
Well,
those LeetCode questions. Those coding platforms assume that there's like these very rote code things on the other end, and those days are gone with the agents. If there are, the agents are doing them.
one, those days are gone, and two, I think the teams that hired those types of engineers or just focused on that for hiring engineers, they were getting uh, coders. They weren't getting engineers. They were getting people that would clickety clack on a keyboard. That's not the same as like actually thinking about the business problem, understanding it, understanding how to solve the business problem and how to understand the business description. Like I mean, like that's the hardest part about being an engineer is translating the non-technical description that you inevitably get that is not very useful into something that's actionable and testable and implementable. And
Talked about this so many times on this podcast and elsewhere. That is the value. If you can translate something from an idea to action.
so let's go full circle back to the original question you asked. In the age of AI coding, how do we interview for engineers?
Mhm.
And I feel like the answer is we have to lean that much more heavily on how good are you at understanding vaguely described business problems and then describing them in a manner that allows them to be broken down into sufficiently executable tasks by an agent, and then that you can evaluate the quality of the plan and ultimately the implementation done by that agent.
Mhm.
That's what matters.
That's it. That's the interview loop right there.
That's the interview. And so tell me examples of that. Star questions that relate to that.
We're going to have 4 sessions and focus on each one of them.
I love it.
I interviewed at Microsoft once.
Uh-huh. Did they ask you lead code questions? Or they ask you how many ping pongs it takes to fill up the Smith Tower?
They did not. I remember a question that was asked of me, though.
Hmm.
You are designing a key fob for a car. What do you need to know? And it was pretty interesting because I knew nothing about key fobs, and I was applying for a job working on the Visual Studio team, actually. So like I had nothing to do at all with what they were doing. And it was a little bit of a trick interview question, but it was, just one of those questions that they were getting at, trying to understand how do you think.
Yeah, totally.
And it only comes to mind now because I think, well, actually, in these days, that's actually might be kind of a handy question. Somebody comes to you and asks you to build them a key fob, and you can get the agent to build the key fob, but you got to ask all the right questions so you can tell the
Exactly.
agent the right thing to do. What do you need to know? Well, first question is, what is this key fob opening? Right?
Right. Right.
What's it a key fob for?
Right.
Um, so yeah, maybe those kind of questions, which I think sometimes can be a little bit of a trick question. I was also asked the question, how many gas stations are there in the United States? But maybe some of those questions are a little bit more relevant these days.
Yeah, I feel like some of those kind of are just a little bit around trickery and just like estimations and strategies for estimations. But I agree with you that there's like it does. If you explain your answer to me, then I get to see how you think the problem through. I just would like to turn those into questions that are more relevant to the task at hand, right?
Yes, I
So I
agree
like
with you.
your key fob question's a better one than how many ping pong balls will fill Smith Tower,
Yeah, that's stupid.
or how many gas stations are there in the United States. You know, like to
The
me, those
gas station ping pong are stupid, but I think the key fob is closer, but key fob's abstract from if it's Visual Studio. If somebody said to me, we want to add spell checking in Visual Studio, doesn't it, believe it or not, it doesn't have spell checking right now.
yeah, there are some plugins for it.
So someone's put in a ticket, add the spell checker.
Yeah, how do we do it?
What do you need to know? Right?
Yeah.
That would probably be kind of a maybe a relevantist question. I don't know.
By the way, I only because I'm a big believer in like if you're gonna like have coding standard rules, then if make sure you can codify them into your linting and your static analysis tool set. And I had a developer on a team that was like really adamant about like he would like refuse pull requests that had like spelling mistakes in the comments or grammatical mistakes in the comments and stuff like that. And I was just like, oh, this is driving me crazy. So I installed like a linting plugin that does spell checking, and it's pretty good, but it's surprising how many technical words it doesn't, or how many times you would like even if you kind of like are anti-abbreviation, there's still times where it's like so this C spell thing just has like this extra thing to add your ignored words or your special words, you know? It's
Mhm.
just like, man. So spell checking, that's a fun one.
So not a good one.
I mean, no, it's a good one. It's got some sharp edges to it. So, you know,
Suppose. Yeah, I mean that's an obvious edge, right? You're going to get all these non-English words.
yeah. So I actually like that one. That right there does sound like a good example. Like if someone was interviewing for, you know, VS Code or something like that, or any kind of an editorial product, then say, oh, yeah, we're going to add a spell checker. What do we need to do? What do we need to know? What are the shapes and what are the boundaries of this thing? How are you going to prompt your AI coding agent to build this, etc.?
Very relevant. Okay, I could use that at TaskRabbit. There's when you go to create a task, there's a message box where you can type in a free text description of what you want. And yeah, hey, and there is no spell checker in there now. We want to add a spell checker button. Or I just actually, I led the witness. We want to add I said spell checker button. We want to add spell checking in there
Yeah, yeah.
because it minimizes confusion. And if we can minimize confusion, we can increase conversion. And as we've talked about on a recent episode, decreased conversion increases customer conversion, which lowers CAC.
Yep. Yep. Love it. There you go. There's the business reason. Now tell me how you're going to build it.
You can build
And
it.
feel free to tell me your favorite AI tool that you're going to use to do it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love it.
Now,
There you go.
do you think for this specific, I'm going to interview you for a second, for
Okay.
this specific implementation, I'm really just getting at a pet peeve I have lately, which is people using AI models for things which AI models are not appropriate
Oh, what
solutions.
should you use like an AI LLM to be your spell checker?
Yes,
No, not at all. That's a bad idea. Why is it a bad idea? I'd say that's a bad idea.
because I think spell checking is fairly deterministic.
Yes, and it's a well-solved problem that can be done in a like there are various spell checking libraries that are compete on speed and performance.
Probably, yeah. So we did an AI hackathon, lots of cool stuff, but there were a handful of things where I was watching the demos and I was like, oh, that's not a good use of AI. That's a deterministic problem.
Exactly. You don't want a probability machine solving a determinant. I don't know. Sometimes strawberry does have two R's in it, and sometimes it has three R's in it. It depends.
Well, this actually begs a different question. Now we're way off of the interviewing topic. This is bonus episode for the listeners who stayed to the end of this thing. This has to do with the enemy perfect is the enemy of good.
Yeah.
Now maybe in spell checking it's not, but for other solutions where it's like, well, maybe probabilistic is good enough because you know why? They could build it fast. It would have taken them more time to go figure out what these different libraries were and then to get a license for them and to figure out how to like get it into the build blah 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 blah. Like, well, look, we had an OpenAI token already. It was really easy.
I don't know. I if they gave me that answer, then I would sort of be like, spell checking, I'm not sold on that one. Right.
It's fair enough. Fair enough. Well, Brad, I feel like I learned something today.
Well, thanks for playing.
It's not a podcast.
Unless we say
Smash that subscribe button.
rate and review. All right.
Thanks for playing along.
Until next week.
Until next week.
Good
Bye,
to see
everyone.
you, Scott. Bye, everybody. This episode of How Many CTOs Does It Take podcast was edited by Saffron Hefta-Gaub. Our theme song was AI generated by Brad. Please follow us on all the social media platforms at How Many CTOs Pod. You can find us on YouTube, LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, Threads, X, TikTok, and Patreon, or at our website at howmanyctospod.com. And remember to rate, review, and subscribe on the podcast platform of your choice. Thanks for listening.